Hello everyone, welcome back to D's Nerds. I'm Michelle, and today we're going to be talking about World of Warcraft novels. Okay, so I'm coming at you today with some basic guides to what to read in the World of Warcraft universe. So if you've never played the game, this is probably a weird video for you to be watching, but if you have some interest in it, or maybe a family member does, or a spouse, or whatever, this can be a good entry point for you to get in if you don't like to play games, but still are interested in talking with them. Or if you do play the game, maybe you just play Classic, maybe you play Retail, and you just want some more background, I'm going to tell you kind of where some of the main stories fit that lead you up into World of Warcraft Classic, the Burning Crusade, and the Wrath of the Lich King. There are quite a few, so I'm going to tell you which ones I think you definitely can't skip and which ones, if you can't find them, you can give a pass. So the first book up is Rise of the Horde by Christy Golden, and this one basically tells, as you might imagine from the title, how the orcs became the bad guys in this story. The orcs, if you've ever played World of Warcraft, you know in the Burning Crusade, there is a group of orcs that are still brown-skinned, whereas the rest of the orcs that we have seen up to that point have been green-skinned. And this basically tells how they went from being those really in touch with nature orcs to becoming these wild, war-crazy orcs that are just trying to take over other lands. It's a very interesting story, deals a lot with Thrall's father and some of the other main Horde characters that you'll be seeing through the rest of not only the series of books, but also in the actual games proper. So this is the perfect one to start with. This will give you all the background about orcs and Draenei. It doesn't include humans or anything like that at this point. This is literally just what's happening while their world was still called Draenor, before it becomes, in Burning Crusade, the Outlands. So this is the perfect one to start with. This is a must read. I would not skip this one at all. Next up is one called The Last Guardian, and I'm actually going to show you this book in another form here shortly, but this is actually technically older, so I should say these books weren't necessarily written in chronological order. They were published at different times. You'll notice that some of these just say Warcraft, and then others, like this one, actually say World of Warcraft. So some of them were published around the original games that you could buy, Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, to tell some more story around that. So you'll notice some difference. And if you actually look at the illustrations on this looks a bit more like the old games as well. But this one's by Jeff Grubb, and this tells the story of how from the humans' point of view, how the orcs actually showed up in Azeroth, and then how they kind of learn about, the Fel and all of that. And it also gives us the backstory of Medivh. So if you've played in Burning Crusade, you've probably been to Karazhan, or at least know that story, and so you're going to get to see how Medivh became what he was and how he became involved in all of that. So this is another one I definitely would not give a pass. This also tells a lot of background about characters who are big in Stormwind and in Alliance territory in general, and tells the story of the Wren family a little bit. So you get some of the older Wrens before we get into where we get Varian and Anduin. So this is their father / grandfather. Okay, so next up is Tides of Darkness, and this one basically tells the story after the Horde has come in and gone and destroyed Stormwind, what happens to all the people there. So we have Anduin Lothar, who is like the big champion. If you watch the Warcraft movie, you'll see him in it and portrayed a bit younger, I think, than what he's described here. And you'll also see Varian Wren, whose father was killed, is a very young king, going to King Taranis and Lordaeron and trying to get help. They also end up teaming up with elves and dwarves. So you're kind of starting to see like the building some of the Alliance pieces now versus just the Horde pieces. And you do get some of the Horde built up in this one as well. You're kind of seeing the different races begin to come together in this one. This is another one I definitely wouldn't skip. It's a pretty big piece of the puzzle. And in fact, a lot of these first ones really tell a pretty continuous story from one to the other. So that's really important. So the next one up is called Beyond the Dark Portal. And in this one, the humans have already shut down the Dark Portal once. Another orc, Ner'zhul, comes in and he reopens it. And some of the Alliance end up going through. So we actually have Khadgar, one of the Windrunner sisters. I'm drawing a blank as to which one it is right now. And then Turalyon have gone through. This basically tells the story of how Draenor becomes Outland. So how the whole thing gets destroyed. And then it also kind of leaves you with, if you played some of the later expansions of the game, how those characters ended up getting stuck here. So this is a really good one for transitioning into that as well. So I think this one definitely plays a big piece in kind of setting up for the Burning Crusade. But again, this is pretty much a direct follow-up to the one before it. So I mean, you just dive right into one and the other. So next up is this is actually 4 books in one, and I said I would show you The Last Guardian in another form here. So this is actually in this book. Now this book is out of print as far as I'm aware. I actually picked this one up used several years ago. You can see the remainder mark on it from where I bought when I bought it. But this has 4 books in it. So the first one of these is Day of the Dragon. And this one, I want to say that it's skippable. I really enjoy it, but I think as far as like the whole story goes, you could probably skip it. It does tell some of the things about the dragons. That's actually the big focus in this one, is the wizard Ronan and the dragons. So it's kind of how the dragons get forced into servitude by the orcs, and then how they're trying to use some of that to dupe the Alliance into believing they're doing something other than what they're actually trying to do. So Ronan gets sent in as a spy. Some things happen and he ends up having to partner up with Crassus, who is a dragon, but he's been in human form. So he usually presents himself that way. And you'll see quite a bit of him there as well. And then in Lord of the Clans, that's one I definitely would not skip if you can find this book. I think that one might also be available by itself, and I'm not positive. But Lord of the Clan tells the backstory of Thrall. So our Horde war chief, at least in the first few iterations of the game, it's his whole backstory. So it's how he grows up enslaved, how he eventually gets free, and then how he becomes in charge of everyone, and kind of what his purpose is. Because if you know anything about his character throughout the games, you know that he's a little bit different and that his motives are usually a little less nefarious than some of his former brethren, especially those who have delved into the kind of warlock magic and whatnot. So you can really see what his purpose is here and why he does what he does. And I think it's very interesting. The last Guardian one appears in this one as well, which I've already talked about. And the last one to me is it's not bad, but I would skip it. It's called Of Blood and Honor. It's about Tyrion Fordring. If you're really into that Paladin storyline and want to know more about how he got to be who he is, you can definitely read it. It's just, to me, that's a skippable one. So, I mean, as far as whole story goes, really the only one in here that I have, that aside from The Last Guardian, which I would definitely read, but the only one I feel like is an absolute you have to is The Lord of the Clans, because it tells so much about Thrall's character. Next up is Arthas. And if you've if you've played Wrath of the Lich King, then obviously you know who this is, but this gives his backstory. So how do we go from being just the prince of Lordaeron to becoming this bad guy? And how Jaina sort of gets tangled into things in the process. So Jaina Proudmoore and he have a pretty intense relationship that starts out as just a friendship and blossoms into something more. And then as he starts to sort of lose his mind and lose his humanity, he also pushes her away. And it's sort of how all of that happens. It also talks about how he creates these hordes of undead and all of that. The Calling of Stratholme, if you ever played and went into that dungeon, that's in this story. So this is a really good one building up toward Wrath of the Lich King. You can definitely skip this one if you're just playing Classic and then up to some, soon to be the Burning Crusade. You can skip this one. I mean, it's part of the story for sure, but like if you're not that concerned about Arthas himself, you can skip over it because it does talk a lot about things in Wrath of the Lich King, or at least that will be in Wrath of the Lich King when we get to that point. But I do think it's an extremely good book. So I wouldn't skip it, but if you really aren't interested in going that far with it, you could skip it. So the next one is kind of an interesting anomaly. So this one is World of Warcraft, Warcraft, War of the Ancients. These are actually 3 books that are a complete story together. This is by Richard A. Knack. And I actually struggled with these the first time I read them, and probably the second time I read them as well. On the third go through, they've been much better to me. But these actually are told starting in one time period and then jumping into another. So what happens is Ronan from Day of the Dragons, he makes a reappearance in this along with Crassus, and the 2 of them together end up getting sucked back in time while they're trying to search out this anomaly. And they also get Broxagar, who is an orc who was also in that same area looking at what was going on at the same anomaly for the Horde. They get sucked back into time before Malfurion and Illidan and Tyrande Whisperwind have kind of become who they end up being as a part of the greater story. So we've gone way, way back. We see Malfurion is just in his training with Cenarion. We see Illidan just learning, what his power can be. And we see the whole downfall of Queen Azshara and how that all happened with the High Elves and all of that, the Highborn. So it's a really good story. Them getting sucked back in time causes some really interesting problems for them because, for example, Crassus, who, like I said, he's a dragon in disguise. He also existed during that time because he's really, really old. So that's caused some trouble, as well as the fact that at this point the night elves had no idea who humans were or who orcs were or anything. So all of these people, all of these characters have gotten thrown back in a really tight spot because now they're looked at as potential enemies at first. So it's an extremely good story, and you get to see the origin of all three of these characters and how they become their more powerful selves that we become familiar with later. So definitely one or three, I suppose, to read, but very good. Again, I think this edition may be out of print, but if I remember correctly, I think they started reprinting these as 3 individual books. So it's the Well of Eternity, the Demon Soul, and the Sundering. So I think you can buy them separately, but you can also probably pick this up used. And then the last one that really hits into World of Warcraft Classic is World of Warcraft Cycle of Hatred. So this essentially is how the humans and the orcs keep getting into these fights. They keep getting into these battles, Horde versus Alliance. And again, involves Jaina Proudmoore and Thrall. They're also trying to fight some outside force that they're uncertain of, while trying to keep their two sides from battling each other, because it doesn't seem to be one another causing their problems. So it's just that kind of tension that's continuing, but also trying to keep those things from happening. So I think it's an interesting perspective in this one. And they do meet a character that is pretty cool. So this is another good one. This one's also very short. It is not even 300 pages long, not even 250 pages long, as a matter of fact. So that one's a really short one, and is definitely the last essential piece before you jump into the games. Now, once you've gone to that point, reading whatever of these you choose to read, you'll be able to go through and play World of Warcraft Classic, The Burning Crusade, and Wrath of the Lich King without skipping a beat. It's not until you reach Cataclysm that they start including books again that fill in gaps. So there's actually, I think, 3 novels in between the end of Wrath of the Lich King and the beginning of the Shattering, and the beginning of the Cataclysm, sorry. And so there's some other things to pick up there. But for what I wanted to focus on for this video are just those that really give you all that background. Now, there are other things that are not novels specifically that you can read if you really want to. There are the 3 Chronicles, and there's some ultimate visual guides and such that you can pick up if you really want more detail, but it's going to be more textbook dry stuff like that rather than actual novels. So I think all of these are very well done. Like I said, there are a couple in there that if you're really not that interested or can't pick up the book anywhere, that you can definitely skip. But I think overall there's a really rich story here. There's a lot of background, and especially if you're not always the best at reading quest text, then these fill in a lot of blanks that you might, or if you don't even get all the quests, you don't even get all the stories. So I think these fill in a lot of those blanks, and then also give you some really cool background. There are also other stories later that take place kind of over the course of 2 time periods, and some of them do come back to this point or earlier. Mainly it's with the dragons. Every time we have a story involving the dragons, it always seems to kind of cross time paths a little bit. So there are others out there, and I can definitely do a video on those if anyone's interested. But for now, I just wanted to go over these. Be sure, if you like this video, to hit that thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell for notifications whenever we post a new video. If you want to let me know down below if you've read any of these, if there are any that maybe come later on you'd like to know more about, or if you'd like a specific review of any one of these books, be sure and let me know down below. Also, we have merch. So there's a link down there as well that on Teespring, you can go and check out t-shirts, mugs, all that kind of good stuff, and see if there's anything you want to support the channel. In between videos, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, so you can chat with us. We're on there pretty much every single day. So with that, I hope you have a great, safe rest of the day. Bye!